All right, so the RBI governor mentioning that while core inflation will remain upwards of 4%, however, the CPI number for this entire year will remain at 3.1%. Remember, that's been revised downwards. And of course, joining us to discuss this further is now Siddhartha Sanyal, Chief Economist and Head of Research at Bandhan Bank. Thank you very much, Mr. Sanyal. So this 3.1% expectation, is that achievable? And is the economy, for the time being, shielded from inflationary risks?
Indeed, we have seen quite a bit of softening of inflation numbers in the near term, and it looks like the full year number can indeed be significantly lower than the RBI's long-term target.
Mr. Sanyal seems to be facing some difficulties with respect to his line. We're trying to fix that. But ladies and gentlemen, we're discussing about the MPC, which has lowered its inflation forecast for this financial year that ends on March 2026, ends in March 2026. In fact, the RBI governor, whilst stating about challenges to inflation trajectory, maintained that 3.1% is going to be the rate of inflation. That's down from 3.7% that was projected for the month of June. In fact, he was also making announcements related to core inflation, CPI inflation. He stated that there are no major negative shocks. He did mention about the shocks that could come on account of tariffs and, of course, global geopolitical situation as it's panning out. He also mentioned about demand side factors as well, and did mention that CPI in 2025-26, that's going to remain at 3.1%. That's down from 3.7% that was projected for the month of June. So essentially what we're trying to discuss on this broadcast with Mr. Sanyal, who's going to be joining us just in a short while from now, is whether this figure that can be achieved, is that maintainable, and what else is RBI factoring in when it gives out that figure, and what could some of the additional shocks that perhaps the RBI is not factoring in. Tomorrow, if Donald Trump announces additional tariffs, which India is not factoring in, could that lead to a revision in projections by the RBI? How will that impact the overall growth of India? That remains to be seen. In fact, I'm told that Mr. Sanyal is back on the line with us. Mr. Sanyal, I was asking you about the 3% growth expectation in terms of inflation. Is that achievable? And is the economy completely shielded from inflationary risks? Because the governor did talk about macro factors.
Well, indeed, the 3.1% number really look achievable. The main factor here is that you have already seen a very significant downward movement in inflation in the initial months of the year. Having said that, one must keep a note of the fact that that does include a forecast of 4.4% of inflation in the fourth quarter of the year. That means at this moment we are seeing a patch of inflation which is really, really low, but going ahead 6 to 8 months down the line, inflation numbers might be slightly higher. So as a whole, therefore, while at this moment the numbers are very, very soft, the RBI actually stays a little cautious and doesn't jump into action right now.
Right, Mr. Sanyal. So you are essentially speaking about the fact that, in some months down the line, we could see elevated inflation levels. What is the percentage that you're factoring in?
Elevated very certainly from the current compared to the current levels. But even then, we are talking about inflation numbers mostly in the range of 4 to 5%, maybe in the initial months of 2026 and the next financial year. So even though the number will be higher than their current level or on an average what we will be seeing in this particular financial year, I won't say this is a number which is alarmingly high. So that actually gives a bit of a room and space for the RBI to stay on hold, maintain a very, 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 a fine balance between growth support and managing inflation.
Right. Mr. Sanyal, the governor did mention about the macro factors that are Fed-related, of course, tariff-related and weather-related events, which could eventually bring headwinds as far as India's growth or inflation trajectory is concerned. But talking about particularly India and US part, both the countries are still negotiating or perhaps, looking at arriving at an understanding on tariffs. What's the government's understanding on what could be announced by Trump? And if these tariff numbers are higher than what the government is factoring in at the moment, how much of a dampener will that be for inflation and, of course, for India's growth trajectory?
That's a very significant potential, risk at this moment. So the way things have panned out over the course of the last maybe a week or slightly more than that was not something we were factoring in that clearly. So basically, this is posing some kind of a risk. We don't really know how difficult that particular terms can be for India. I'll not be too worried right now on the inflation front because the global commodity price cycle really seemed to be quite subdued. Food price inflation seemed to be quite under check. But in case if we see very significant or adverse set of tariffs, etc., we might actually see some bit of additional headwinds for growth. And you need to be very clear about it. At this moment, the high frequency indicators about growth is really a mixed bag. So in case if urban consumption and export facing sectors fresh set of headwinds, that might actually pose a little more risk on the growth front of the 6.5% forecast that we have than on the inflation side. So my sense is that while the RBI stays on hold at this moment, they will be watching both these numbers and possibly the growth numbers and growth indicators a lot more carefully to decide on the future course of action on their part.
Right, Mr. Sanyal. Absolutely, and that remains to be seen, Mr. Sanyal, and of course a lot will get a clearer. In fact, tonight itself, when Donald Trump is expected to at least make his announcement on tariffs, that's essentially what he stated in a tweet that he put out yesterday. But for the time being, thank you very much for taking the time out and speaking to us here on ET Now.